Hello, everybody. Very special episode of Writers Drinking Whiskey coming up. Got Eriq La Salle on. You may know him as an actor, producer, director, also a really wonderful writer. I'm going to get two readings from him. We're going to start off with a reading from his book, if I can point to it. There it is, Laws of Depravity. And that's going to have a book 3 coming out in conjunction with this interview. So you'll get a reading of that later on in the show. Explore the gambit, get into all things his writing in New York, life, philosophy, spirituality. It's a brilliant time. So please join us. Cheers, everybody. Everybody, welcome to Writers Drinking Whiskey. I'm your host, William R. Hensey, and joining me today is I'm thrilled and honored, and as the kids no longer say, over the moon, to have Eriq La Salle with me. Eriq, welcome to the Whiskey Bar.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I'm sure our audience recognize you from all your film and TV credits, but this being Writers Drinking Whiskey, we want to talk about the writing. Notably, we'll be talking about your crime thriller, The Martyr Maker. I got book 1. I'm horrible about pointing, but book 1 here, behind me. I know book 3 will be coming out right around the release of this video, so people will be able to pick that up. Do you want to give us maybe a little background on the series?
Yeah, well, the Martyr Makers series is it basically focuses on it's very much in the vein of the movie Seven. So where you have an Irish Italian American cop partnered up with an African American cop. They are considered the 2 best closers in all of New York. So they get the high profile serial killers cases. And so they end up partnering with a Jewish female FBI agent because I was inspired by this book. I read an article just randomly. And I didn't know this, and a lot of people don't know it, but it's there. It's not in the Bible, but a lot of biblical scholars, and if you Google it, if you just put in "how did Jesus's disciples die," well, they were all brutally murdered, and it wasn't just the 12 that we think of. There were actually like 30 or so, called the lesser and the minor, the lesser. I think they're the lesser disciples or something like that. So, they were all beheaded, crucified upside down, because some of them didn't feel that they were worthy to die the same way that Jesus was killed. They were beheaded, they were dragged through. They died horrible deaths, except for John, who was put into a vat of boiling oil and somehow survived. And then he was banished to the Greek island of Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelations. Well, anyway, when I read that article, I was like, wow, I didn't know that. It's really cool. And then, of course, once you look it up, it's there. And so I thought it would be really cool to come up with a modern day serial killer who was killing fallen clergy in the same brutal manner that Jesus's disciples were killed. So that part of it actually came to me first before the protagonist. So I had my bad guy, and so it just grew from there. And then one of the cops in the first book, the Irish Italian cop, was an altar boy who was who basically was molested by a priest. So he has these really interesting conflicting goals and thoughts and feelings about this whole thing. So that was the birth of the franchise with that particular case. And then after that, basically, each book focuses on one of the cops' issues with the case. And so obviously the fact that you have a former altar boy who was molested by priests investigating the brutal murders of priests, I thought was cool. Conflict. The second book, the African-American cop, his father was a notorious gangster turned legitimate businessman, but back in the day he was considered the Black Godfather and Godfather of Harlem. Some of the things that he did in the past comes back and haunts them in a new case 30 years later. And then in the third book, the FBI agent, who is Jewish, they are investigating anti-Semitic crimes. So each case does something personal to, and even though the franchise is the same, it's all three of them in every book. They're all throughout it, but one just has a stronger point of view based on the case. So that is in essence, that is the franchise.
Right. Sure. Well, and I connected right away. The Irish Italian guy. Right before we're filming this, I was back east visiting my family, and my grandfather is Irish, just full Irish. My grandmother's full Italian. So we were visiting all that family and everything. So it's like gave me that nice feeling. And then I'm reading the book, and I'm like, hey, see myself here. It was fun. But I think everyone will find something of everything there. So, and that is a perfect cue. Because, the one thing I love about the show, my first question, usually I wanted to start talking about Martyr Maker. I get too overeager here, is what are we drinking today?
We are drinking a brand new to me. This is my first time tasting it on your show. It's a wine called from Quaya. And I was actually given this to me as a birthday present. And this is a Chardonnay. They do a Merlot, a Sangiovese, and so I figured I would try it. It's a cool organic wine. So I literally just had my first sip, and I actually really like it. Very smooth, pretty good. So
very good.
So yes, I think it's from Freeze. And then I know, since it's just to let you know, I was ready for. For whiskey. I'm not a big whiskey drinker, but this I've had a couple of times, and this is very special. So that's my drinking for the day.
Perfect. That'll be perfect for the shot section that comes up, later when it's a shot every question.
Okay. I don't know about that. I still have work to do today.
I'm kidding. And I got a special bottle here. My brother-in-law, Ken, got this for me. It's Booker's. So I thought it would be fun. And this will be the first time for me trying this too. So I'll pour that, and I'll sip on this as we chat. As I pour this, maybe we could go ahead and ask. I'm wondering, because we learned about Martyr Maker here, and the genesis of that. I wonder about the genesis of Eriq La Salle, the author. Like when did you start kind of writing fiction? How did that journey begin? Was that something you've always done? Is that something newer? Any light you can shed on that?
Great question. When I was a kid, I entertained thoughts of being a writer. I used to write poetry, and I'm talking 8, 9 years old, and I would write poetry for relatives that were trying to win the heart of some unfortunate young girl. And so I started, but then I discovered acting at 14 and got into acting and sort of put writing on the on the shelf. And so it was actually when I started directing, after I did an intensive course on directing, that I then started writing short stories, short screenplays to film. Then that led to full-length screenplay. So that's sort of that got me back in love with the art of writing. I was, I think in '95, I played the main character for John Sanford's series, the Prey series. So Lucas Davenport is his hero. So some producers came to me and said, "Hey, we'd love to do this. Turn this book." It was the book was Mind Prey. I think there are maybe 20 or 30 books in the Prey series. This was one of the earlier ones, and so they said, "We have the rights to it. We'd love for you to do it." And so I produced it and acted in it. And so that was, I just fell in love with thrillers. I fell in love with, the adrenaline, et cetera. So that sort of started steering me in that direction. And then years later, once I really sort of built up the courage to think I could write a novel, I knew I wanted it to be a thriller. So that's kind of the evolution of it. And then I've just been, trying, and then, you started learning about a different craft. You start going to book conferences. One thing that I do is I have a lot of respect for each discipline. I don't treat each discipline the same. So, I knew I had to, just as I'm a classically trained actor, just as I had gone to study doing that. I also wanted to be thought of as a a classical writer, in the sense, someone that really understands and respects the craft, which, for me, but the bottom line is I'm a storyteller. And I love telling stories, whether I'm directing, whether I am producing, whether I'm acting. It's all ultimately storytelling. So those are the similarities that it has. But then at the same time, you do learn to respect the specific discipline for what it is. And so that's pretty much the genesis in that. So I wrote I started writing when I turned 50, and just it's never too late. And I just kind of wanted to have a different control over writing and I should say over storytelling, and writing gave me that. So the cool thing is they all feed each other. My acting feeds my writing feeds my directing feeds my producing. Like, it all, so when I'm an executive producer, knowing how I've been treated over the years as an actor by certain producers, you learn to go, okay, I don't want to handle it that way. So it makes me a really good producer, because I've learned as an actor, I don't want to treat actors the way sometimes I've been treated. Listen, I've had a charmed career. I've had an amazing career, but just sometimes, you run into some producers that are kind of slimy or dishonest or pathological liars. But that's been a minority. I mean, unfortunately, it's been a minority, but it happens. But it's helped me to become a better producer. And me being a better producer helps me to become a better writer. You start writing with costs in mind and production in mind. So they all come into play, and I really, really enjoy that. Yeah.
Right. No, that's I'm glad you said that, because one of the things I really took from, because of course I've seen shows you produced, and watched shows you've been in and movies you've been in. But reading the Martyr Maker was it really comes out that storytelling. And I think that's beautiful how you translated it all through, and then how they can all interrelate and everything. Because a lot of times I think of that like, you're wildly more successful than I am, so take this with a grain of salt. But I started writing very young as well, and got into acting when I was 17, 18. I kind of kept writing, actually, and then I had kids young. I never did anything. I think the most people I ever acted in front of was like 800, 900, and some community plays and things. But they fed in. I saw how they fed in. So, and I still, to this day, when I write and I'm in a character's point of view, I think of it like I'm an actor going through that. Like, what is my motivation? What is my, what is my backstory here? How does that all feed in? And it's a wonderful way to kind of see it 360 and
well, it really is. I think you nailed it. I think viewing it from a 360 point of view, it is sort of a shift of perspective, and being able to make that shift, I think, gives you more rewards, because not everyone can make those shifts. They have a more limited perspective. But when you've been doing so many different things, you bring all of those things together, and then you go, oh, let me look at it from this point of view. Let me look at it from this point of view. If I were an actor, does this dialogue feel rich? Does it feel genuine? Does it feel and then the overall tone of my books, also the benefit is they're very visual. They are like I write them so that you can literally see, almost like a screenplay, in the sense that you're real, like the detail, like people talk about the detail in my writing. Well, that detail is, because I don't have a camera to show you, I have words to get you there and to make you understand what the weather's like, what the clothes are like, what the food smells like. So that challenge in writing is, the cool thing about writing is you realize, even when you're stuck, even when you have writer's block, even when you have whatever, you realize the thing about writing that's constant is this: there's always the right words. The goal is you just have to find them. So there are, the English language is very expressive, very, like, sometimes you hear about other languages and they have their dynamic, but they don't have a word for this. And you go, wow, but what they do have is also interesting, So for me, the goal is like, Okay, I just got to find, I know there's the right sentence. I know there's the right descriptor. I know there is. I might not find it that day. I might not find it for a week. I might not, but then when you find it, so I think that hope always keeps you going, that finding the right words and then finding it in the most original tone and the most original expression of it is something that I'm blown away by. Actually, it keeps me fascinated with the art of writing.
It does, because it's always the challenge, right? Like I think of it a lot of times like sculpting. It's like you kind of get a first draft, you get some materials, but now you're trying to chisel, you're trying to find that aspect of the thing, like what it's there, it's there, and you're just
Right.
digging and trying to uncover and form it.
You keep on, yeah, and the more you chip away, you start discovering other things. You start discovering the stone beneath the stone. You start discovering the veins in the stone, the contours. And so, if you're confident enough, you sometimes let that carry you. There are many writers, and I'm not this type of writer. I have a lot of respect for people that do this. I'm not a cue card person. I can't, and I know many of the greats do it. I kind of jump in and see where the stream takes me. Where's the flow? I'm like, oh wow, this is interesting. You know what I mean? If I had cue cards, if I had the cards, all spelled out, I don't know how much I would stay on that path. I've never done it, so I can't. And again, I'm certainly not criticizing it. These great writers do this. I'm just talking about my personal style. Doesn't. I'm just creative. I'm like, okay, wow. And then all of a sudden, I did an interview with. I was interviewing an author by the name of Ivy Pakoda, who I suggest you have on your show. She's really, really cool. I was interviewing her Monday night at a bookstore. And I asked her, I said, do you let your characters talk to you and decide their own fate? And she said, yeah. And it was kind of cool, because I thought I might be the only one, because I've had characters fight to live. I'll say, oh, they're going to die. and then this character just starts fighting with you, like, no, you got to keep me alive. You got to. And so for me, by not having it on cards, that, when you do, cue cards, index cards, whatever you work with, it allows me to just kind of let them, take me where it will go.
Sure. Yeah, I think of it that way. I'm the same way. I think of it that way too. Is as you start writing, you're kind of on a journey, right? And so you're on that journey to kind of discover where that story is going. And the characters are along with you on the road trip with you, and then afterwards, the reader goes on that same journey you did. So it's funny because it's not as immediate as if you're doing a play or something. But for the reader, it is immediate. And as you write it, there's some immediacy to it. So there is that just kind of sacred connection there that I think is really fun. I love that. You let the characters decide their fate. That's a brilliant way to think of it. So, but yes, I mean, some people are architects and come up with fabulous, great things too. So, I mean, it has to go by who you are and how the creative process works for you.
And that's the beauty of being creative. No, it's not a one size fits all. And that's why I say I never think about criticizing a person's process. It's what that works for you. Just like I hope people don't criticize my process. If they do, I'm okay with it. But because we can get equal results as far as poignancy and relevance and how touching it is and how absorbing it is, and all of that from that's the beauty of art. That is the beauty of art. You can have someone who says, I've never taken an acting class in my life, and they can get up and give the most beautiful raw performance. And then you can have someone who studied and studied, and they could be flat. They could be, or vice versa. They could give this amazing performance, and the other person can't really get it together. So, or they're both equally impressive, just different ways. That's the beauty of art. And I think that I'm really inspired and liberated by the fact that it is not a formula that that you have to adhere to, and if you don't, you're breaking rules and you're not going to be good. I love the freedom of choice.
Sure. Well, and that's probably a great time. Do you mind reading us from maybe, I think we talked about I'm going to try to point again horribly here, the laws of depravity here.
I'll read. This is the opening chapter, which is actually pretty short. Okay, let's see here. All right, laws of depravity. This is the very first chapter. God had surely forsaken him. How else could he justify the pure evil that held him captive? Everett Degler was committed to God. He passionately dedicated his entire life to serving and pleasing his Lord. Everett converted souls and spread the gospel. He had instilled in both of his sons a fear of the need to worship God, even if at times he had to physically beat those principles into them. Degler made the necessary sacrifices. Whatever was required of him to gain God's favor and protection, he did without question. In the fall of 1981, the city of San Francisco was on edge with the murders that had played out in the news for the past month. Everett heard about the 11 victims, but never doubted for a moment that God was always watching over him. Everett's hands were tightly bound behind his back, and his eyes blinded by the cloth that had been securely placed during his abduction. As he was roughly led from the van that he had been thrown in earlier, he was aware of the cool trickle of urine that ran down the front of his thigh. Fear and absence of sight made him stumble and fall even under the firm guidance of strong hands. He tried to pray, but every new sound brought a greater distraction and sense of fear and dread. It took some time, but the two men found the perfect spot to kill Everett. It was an abandoned church on the outskirts of San Francisco in the Sonoma suburbs. Small and in the middle of nowhere, it offered them the type of privacy needed for the things that were planned. The men were brothers. The younger, one named Abraham, and the other, Noah. Abraham, at 23 years old, was tall, extremely muscular, and the leader of the two. He had not involved Noah in the 11 prior murders, but he wanted him here now as a spectator and not a participant. Unlike Abraham, Noah didn't have the stomach to inflict pain, but observing it was a different matter. Besides, he had many reasons of his own for wanting to be present. Everett was still blindfolded as one of the men forced a large plastic capsule in his mouth and made him swallow. He was then attached to an old pulley device. Slowly, he was lowered into a vat of boiling water. He was pulled out just as his skin blistered and he was being asphyxiated by the steam, which was scalding and constricting his lungs. He was only immersed in the water for a few seconds, but the pain was searing and excruciating. Everett wasn't sure if he had passed out or not, but suddenly he felt the presence of one of the men just in front of him, pouring ammonia on his raw skin. As Everett screamed, he felt the man's hand loosen his blindfold. It took a moment for him to gather his bearings and vision. The blurred image of two men standing before him finally became clear. It was the recognition of the men that terrified him even more than what they had already endured. Everett was desperately trying to make sense of the sight of his two sons standing before him when Abraham stepped closer and smiled as he whispered, "Hello, Father."
Wow.
There we go.
That is.
So,
is there an audiobook?
Yes.
Did you narrate it or?
Yes.
Okay. Gee, I was about to say that is like, I recently read it and that kind of transported me all over again. And you could really see that you had talked about painting the image, right? Getting the image and that is vivid and visceral. I guess my first question is on it is what haunts you? Like, to this, I mean, the subject matter, does it come from, I mean, is it a deeper place, just imagination, just?
Well, no, yeah, it's imagination, and it is, when you write a thriller, there are certain principles and certain guidelines and certain things to make you a good thriller writer. And one of them, and this is very high on the list, is originality of character, and when I say character, I mean bad guy. Originality of an antagonist, and originality of torture. Because when this person kills this way, this person kills that way, and some of that can be very frightening and disturbing, et cetera, even if it's things that we're familiar with. But I think when you read a book or you see a movie, and one of the things that this is based on, the movie Seven. Seven was such an original. You're killing people based on their sins. You're the seven deadly sins. And I just thought, I was like, wow, what a great bad guy. What an original bad guy. And so that really inspired me to, every time I create a bad guy or bad guys, it's how original can they be, and how original are the kills, because thriller writers like to be surprised, like to be like, oh, wow, I've never quite seen it done that way. So you're striving for that, not just for the sake of doing it. It has to be organic. It has to be, this is the way that they're killing him is integral to the story. And the fact that this is their father, as you get into the story, you'll understand why, you'll understand the significance of how they're killing him, why they're killing him. So those things are really important. So yeah, so it's all imagination, and it's all trying to be being dedicated to giving readers an original voice, original visions, original chills, and thrills. Sure. So that's, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So when you do it, you brought up the antagonist here. One of the things I loved about, especially the first book, is the villain still has some flaws and things, right? He has some, I don't know how much we want to kind of give away, but he's got stuff going on. Like he's, kind of coming to the end of a rope here, and so he's not this kind of superhero, or super villain kind of that you see sometimes. You'll get a thriller to where, and it's just the villain's just always 1,000 steps ahead, and until they're not, right, and they just kind of suddenly wraps up. What was so great about this one is he's struggling, and he has, just like typically you have protagonist, antagonist, right? Protagonist kind of struggles, and in this case he's struggling, and they're both kind of struggling, kind of back and forth. How do you balance, kind of creating a villain that is threatening, and ominous, and foreboding for the reader, but then also has some humanity to him and has some flaws, has things he's trying to come over?
Well, because I think that makes the character much more frightening, the more relatable the character is. When you have someone who's such a monster, it's easy for us to just dismiss them and not be threatened. Oh, that's fantastical. That's nothing to do with reality as I see it. But when you have the killer next door, when you have someone who does have humanity, even though they're doing horrible things, ironically, some of the best compliments I've gotten on this book is, and reviews have been people saying, I know he was the bad guy, but I was kind of rooting for him, and then you're like, this says a lot. And it's just like, think about this. Look at what they were able to accomplish with Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs. So here's a guy who's a cannibal. You don't get more heinous than that. You eat people. Right. And yet at the end, what were we doing? We were rooting for him. We were cheering when he says, I'm having a friend over for lunch. Right. You know what I mean? I know, so right. What does that say about us? But because he was so endowed with humanity and intelligence and charm and wit, and not just, the mustache twirling stereotype, it humanized. So I learned from, fortunately as a writer, I get to draw from several sources. I draw from movies, from TV, from books, and not necessarily in that order, but I get to, because I have a really good grasp on films, of course, and film references, and with books. So I draw from all of those things. And so when I think of that, Anthony Hopkins became somewhat, although Degler in this case is not as intelligent and suave as Anthony Hopkins, I did draw from that just in his sense of humanity and his sense of logic, his sense of, well, these people do this, so this is what happens. And so I think that makes it more scary. I think it makes it much more frightening of having someone that you like or someone that you could like, and you're fighting that throughout the whole read. You're like, I'm not supposed to like this guy. I'm not supposed to like this guy. And then people write me and they're like, I liked him, and people then they have to justify their own humanity. They go, I know it's wrong, and I shouldn't be rooting for him. He's a serial killer, but I was torn, and so I started with, and I also, for me, I think it's really important to have flawed protagonists, because I think when you have a dynamic antagonist, they're always at risk of stealing the show. They're always at risk of stealing the book because they get to do whatever. And so sometimes when you have a goody two-shoe person, they get a little boring, where the bad guy gets to do all kinds of, look at Heath Ledger's performance in Batman. Like, we loved him, and I'm a Christian Bale fan ultimately, but he just overpowered Batman and how dynamic he was, and we couldn't take our eyes off of him. He had the most fun, whereas Batman at that point had to sort of be the straight guy, although Batman is a tortured soul, and they tried to put that in. So I come from that place of having two tortured entities, knowing that they're going to clash, putting them on their course, because my books are just as much, they're not just about solving the case. It raises the question, will the protagonist survive the case? And not just physically, morally. Will they give up a part of their soul? Or their soul is already broken when the case starts? Will this hellacious case that they're going through, this horrible case, sometimes it actually heals them? And in Laws of Depravity, you have a little bit of, that, where you have a character who is, one of the protagonists is broken, and it's by going through hell. And it's sort of this sort of mythological journey of, when you think about, what is it? Euripides? Who goes through hell?
I know what you're talking about. The 7 layers of hell.
Euripides, but having to go through that, we see when characters go through hell, in mythology, and they come back, and so metaphorically, I write from that point of view of putting the character, saying that their journey will involve them going through Orpheus. Orpheus is the character that Orpheus is the character who goes through hell to find his woman, and he loses her again because he can't wait to put his eyes on her, even though he was told not to. So having characters go through that and having it cost them, but they can sometimes come out. So it adds another element of intrigue, because in general, with storytelling, 9 out of 10 times, we ultimately know what's going to happen. Sure. 9 out of 10 times, we know the good guy is going to catch the bad guy. So because it has to work on that level. Now, every once in a while, you get Silence of the Lambs, where the bad guy actually gets away. But in general, and the reason that has to happen is because if the good guy does not catch the bad guy, for the most part, and I think Silence of the Lambs pulled it off brilliantly, is it will diminish the glow and talent of the protagonist. If you failed at your job, if you didn't get the bad guy or bad person or bad persons, you failed at your job. So you can't really do a lot of franchises where the bad person is getting away.
Sure.
Every once in a while. So understanding that, knowing giving the audience credit for being intelligent, giving the audience credit, the same whether I'm doing television, movies, whether I'm directing, producing. I always want to respect the audience, always want to respect the reader. Okay, you're intelligent, but let me throw some curves in there in such a way that you ultimately start doubting what you think you already know. And even if you go, well, he might or she might get the bad guy, but it's going to cost them something that's going to really hurt. So now I'm on edge because I'm like, oh my God, like, okay, but don't lose your soul. Don't, you know what I mean? Sure. I know you can do this. Right. And now, and then there are times I'm rooting for the bad guy. So by doing that, it really kind of keeps the audience sort of on edge. It keeps them off balance, which I think is the key to storytelling, because you have to, as a storyteller, no matter what, you have to find a way to stay 10 to 20 steps ahead of your audience, because audiences are so smart now. They go, oh, I knew this was going to happen. I knew this. So that's why I like the twists have to be really, really cool twists when they go, oh, okay, I missed that one. Wow. And now you earn that trust from them. And that's sure. my approach. Yeah.
Right. Well, and you have to build that tension to keep them going. So even though they're probably going to catch the bad guy in the end, you have to build tension to keep them wanting to read and enjoying it. And exactly. I think to your point, one of the things that really struck me about Laws of Depravity was felt like they were in spiritual danger. Especially Kavanaugh felt like he was in spiritual danger the whole time. And you get that, you have the battle between characters that are faithless or trying to find their faith or in turmoil there, versus a character in I'm blanking on his name, but the bad guy in Degler. Degler, yeah. Degler, who you could look at and go, well, he's fanatical, but he's committed. Like he's faithful, like to what he believes.
He's committed to it. Exactly. Yeah.
And they're on that opposing side. It's the good guy's the one that's struggling with it, and he's not. And then you have that extra conflict and that extra kind of danger brooding the whole time you read it.
Those are the types of ironies I think that keeps things fresh, because a lot of times the good guy is so centered in their faith. They're so flawless. They're so and like I said, it doesn't always make for the most interesting characters. But if you have someone who is struggling, who is flawed, well, we can relate to that more. It also allows them to have more obstacles and have more challenges, because they're like, oh, wow, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't know. I mean, early in the book, you have, good people thinking of just committing murder, you know what I mean? And just not justify it, but you go, sure. Oh, this is my good guy, and they're contemplating murder. Here's my bad guy. And, like you said, very committed to his faith and, to a fanatical level, but very committed to his faith. And you understand how he was built. That's why this first chapter that I just read is so important. Is very short, but it's very important because we're talking about the construction of a serial killer. We're talking about the development. I'm always fascinated. What turns a person? Is it nurture versus nature? What turns a person to do something so heinous? So when you see these crimes committed, at some point you go, okay, what got them there? What got them there? And so I like to go back and show. And so that's why that first chapter is important. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, that's brilliant, because it made me think. There was a study, and if I'll try to with the show notes here find it and put it on a link, but that I read many years ago, and it was a neuroscientist, and he was studying brains, and he started studying the brains of serial killers. and I forget which area of the brain. I think it might have been like the frontal lobe. But he had said all of the serial killers had low frontal lobe activity, if it was frontal lobe. And then, but he said, lots of people do. It doesn't make a serial killer. But then he kind of found that, there's the so-called kind of warrior gene that kind of can make people more aggressive. And then the third factor that he found with all of them was childhood abuse. And so it kind of was that nature nurture. It's swirled, kind of all in there. And he found, which was really interesting. So I'll try to make sure I include it on here. And I can send it to Penny if you'd like to read it as well. But
no, absolutely, yeah.
He found that he had low frontal lobe activity, and he had no abuse when he was a kid. He certainly, wasn't a serial killer that we know of, yet. but
Right.
but he had talked about there were times where he was insensitive, and not, just to like his brother and things. And he talks about some of them in the thing, but it made me think of that reading through all of the characters, kind of what they've been through and why one goes through, why one kind of becomes a cop, one becomes a priest, one becomes a serial killer, when the situations in their past aren't so different, and maybe severity different.
Exactly. Well, you can have two people, raised in the same household, and they become very different. And sometimes it's just the perfect storm of all of those things. So, frontal lobe degradation or smallness, whatever, abuse, but and then there's just something in a person. There are many people that's been abused that have turned things around and not imprisoned by that. So there's so many, you just never know. But I think sometimes it's a combination. It's the perfect storm. It's how a person is built. So I think it's a combination of nature and nurture. I think some people are inherently born a certain way. I'm not necessarily saying to the point of being a serial killer, but may become more susceptible to that with the other right ingredients in place and the right elements in place, I should say. So that is something that I find fascinating. Yeah.
Sure. And one of the things I wanted to touch on, because you had touched on it a few minutes back, but about the good guy kind of needs to win because you can't have a franchise when they just keep losing. But one of the things I find with reading crime thrillers and reading your work in particular as well is there is something that they kind of keep failing until they finally succeed, right? Especially in Laws of Depravity, right? He keeps killing, and so each kill is in essence the detective failing.
Right.
And for the reader, it's really interesting because we get a chance to kind of learn through failures, learn how to kind of keep going, keep striving, keep persevering through it, in the midst of failing at this monumentally important task, but then also having all of these emotions, all of these, spiritual crises, new love lives, all these things going on, and then how to kind of still push through failure. Is there anything like in your career that mirrors, or your life that you've had to go through like failure, or maybe with even the writing of this?
Well, I mean, I think two things. First, addressing there's a cop mentality, and there's a victor's mentality, which is this: when you are pursuing a criminal, when you're in certain positions, they have to be perfect every time. You only have to be perfect one time. So, so I don't know sometimes if you look at things as like, I'm hesitant to use the word failure, depending on the day, because sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. But in my sort of truest comfort within myself, I question, was it a failure? You don't know if it's a true failure until the game is over, because that setback or that misdirection or that thing that pushes you, you're going down Main Street, and then all of a sudden you end up on 2nd Street. And you go, oh, I should have stayed on Main Street. But you don't know until you fully walk and come back around, you don't know. Making that turn taught you something, may have delivered you somewhere that you wouldn't have been. So it's hard to classify things as a failure until, don't get me wrong, look, there are times when even still, people will lose everything they have. But does that lead them to a different type of success? Does that? So I do think that there are, I don't know, I kind of think that we co-write our destinies with God. I think God says, I know the best path, but I don't know. And this is for those, I don't put my spirituality on other people, but for me. So God may say, I know the best path, but I'm not going to make it the only path. So even though maybe I didn't go God's path, but I did these things and I kind of ended up here, and maybe, maybe a little less money here, maybe not with this person, maybe not. But until you get there and go, oh my God, I feel so centered. I feel so enriched. I feel so, you know what I mean? It's hard to use the word failure, but I do think that, back to the first part of it, I do think that when you have the mentality of, I just have to be perfect one time and they have to be perfect all the time, it levels the playing field, so yeah, we're nine, no, don't get me wrong, yes, of course people are still dying, and so you got to figure it out. But then again, this person was so brilliant that it makes your protagonist can have to be, the more brilliant your antagonist is, the more brilliant your protagonist has to be, just to, what I mean? So otherwise it's just, it's just too easy. So once you get to the end, so yes, there are more bodies, but who else would have been able to stop this brilliant person, even though it seemed, like you say, even though they were shooting their shot, they missed 9 out of 10. Once they hit that 10 back, that's all she wrote. And then, okay, you know what I mean? But this thing could have gone on. This thing has been going on for years. Who knows what would have happened? And there were successes because they did save lives. And yes, there were lives lost, but they also saved lives as well. But those lives were, and then at the same time, those lives were going to be taken no matter what, because this person is that brilliant. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, I think that's a brilliant way to say it too. Look at it as setbacks, not so much failures all the time. Yeah. So I think that's lovely. It kind of reminds me of I grew up in the LA area here, with Kobe Bryant, and there would be games where he would shoot, 10 of 30, but he hits the game winner. No one talked about that he was, couldn't make a shot most of the game.
And that's it right there. Exactly. You know what I mean? Because you go, look, he kept shooting. He kept shooting, and there was magic that happened at the right time. It didn't happen throughout the whole game, but it happened at the right time, and he's still a hero. So did he fail? There was setbacks. So that's how I strive to consistently look at. On good days, I'm there. On not so good days, you have to remind yourself. On horrible days, you call it failure. So that's how I look at it. Yeah.
Sure. Awesome. And the other part I wanted to talk about, so setting of the book is New York. I've never been, but getting to your point about trying to really paint vivid pictures. I think there's Battery Park. There's driving around Manhattan at one point at 4 a.m. and it's really painted so vividly and beautifully. Have you? I imagine with all the acting and thing, you have spent a lot of time in New York. But is that? I used to
live in New York. I lived in New York for 14 years.
Okay.
So I moved. It was actually the formative years. I moved there at 18 to attend college, and then I started my career. And then I moved out to California, back in the 90s. So I've been out here for like 20 something years. I love California, but the East Coast just had for me a certain type of grit that made it like I needed I needed the city to be a character. I wanted New York to be a character. I wanted whatever city I was gonna place this in. I needed it to be a character because the elements, the personalities, the shorthand with people, the how do you get around? So my protagonists are not above kind of going around things. That's New York. Like that like New York, they just get it done. Good or bad, they get it done. And so I wanted to take those character traits and put them in a city that felt vibrant, that fed them, and at times maybe even almost overtook them. But it's just a cool way of just adding another character in without it being a person. And that was, yeah.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I need to get, I've never, all of the traveling, we haven't made it yet. So I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to make it out there. Selfishly.
It ain't the West Coast. It's very different. It's a little hard. Vacations are good there, but it's not now. I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm ready to go home now. So.
Sure. Well, we've been out here. My family's all in West Virginia, Pennsylvania and stuff. So we were just visiting them, but we go visit. If we go somewhere and it's too cold in the winter, even though my wife and I even love the rain, but even the rain we had last year in the LA area here was crazy. And we're like, what's happening? We can't deal with this anymore. Once you've lived in perpetual sunshine, it's hard to you vacation there. It's hard to kind of live outside of it. So, selfishly, I ever go to New York, what's the one thing you have to do? And like, where's the best place to get a drink?
Wow. New York has changed so much since, like I said, I left mid-90s. So now when I go, it's usually for work, and that's pretty regimented. So it's not, and I'm not like the big go out to the bar kind of like. I stay in a hotel Midtown. There's a bar right next door that, so I don't know the names of these places.
Sure.
Places like I frequent like that. It's just kind of like, oh, that's also kind of and I know this is not an excuse. That is also a part of New York's personality sometimes. Hey, meet me at the bar on 34th and 9th. You don't know the names. You had the name, so you're like, yeah, what's the name of it? You'll see it. 39th, and so that's also part of it. And so, like I said, since I'm not a big go out bar guy, like I'm, this bar. I mean, there was always, when I was in college, and I really didn't drink at all in college. There was McCluskey's, there were the Irish pubs, there were the spots on Amsterdam, so you knew the general area, you knew the, but there were quite a few Irish bars that a lot of my classmates went to, and you know what I mean? And I was just kind of awkward because I'm sitting in the corner drinking orange juice and cranberry juice mix, you know what I mean? So, but I would say, just with how much New York has changed, it's I don't know so much is if there are sections that you just want to hit. You want to do Midtown. Like I went to a Broadway play when I was there 2 months ago, and I'm walking around. Times Square is very different than the Times Square when I was there. You know what I mean? So, but it was just like a different energy. They literally had, in the heart of Times Square, they had a giant yoga class. And when I say giant, I mean like a couple of hundred people in the middle of Times Square with the yoga instructor on the and like when I moved to New York, you would know that was not going to be happening. So it's a very so it's like if you go, you got to go to Midtown, you got to go down to the Village, you got like there are sections that you need to go more so than specific places just to get the shift of things. You go, just get some comfortable sneakers and just walk the city. That's the best way to really see New York City. Yeah.
Awesome. Remember that. That is funny that you would think that was something like that someone would say about LA. Like there's a giant yoga class on the Santa Monica Pier or something, right?
Yeah, no, this was, I had to stop. I was just, and they had it on two sides, like the speaker was in the middle, and there were like 150 people this way, another 150, and it was a thing. It was a real thing, and I was like, I was with one of my boys, and I was like, "What the hell is going on?" He's from out here as well. He's like, "Dude, I don't know,"
Right.
and but yeah, no, New York has definitely changed. I lived in Harlem, and Harlem is definitely sort of going under the gentrification type thing now. So it's not even the old Harlem that I knew. So it's a lot. Now you see, Whole Foods, and I'm not knocking it. It is what it is. But when I was living there, you didn't see Whole Foods and Starbucks and
Sure.
these places, Lululemon, and you're like, what? It's it just feels like that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Getting back to the Martyr Maker, there was one scene I had dog-eared on it because I enjoyed it so much, and it was Detective Fee. It was his dinner with his dad Clay, and he had talked about his upbringing and one of the things his dad had taught him. And I may have mistakenly taught this too well to my kids as well, but was always act like you belong. Like when you go somewhere, act like. And so what I had told my kids before, I forget what I was doing, some minor. I used to love to go look at birds. I think I was watching hawks, and I trespassed into do not trespass desert land, right? And they're like, "Dad, you can't do that." I'm like, "Look, the secret is whatever you're doing, just act like that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing." And most of the time, people never say anything to you. You just go act like if you're supposed to be doing that. I actually feel like when I started the show, that's what I was doing. Like I'm not sure what I'm doing. I'm just acting like this is exactly the thing I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
Was that something that came from real life? Is that something you learned, or was it?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with, um, I think, sort of the racial divide in the country and the mentality that goes with that, which is this. I think that Clay was being a notorious gangster, had to move through the world with a slightly different gene than many African Americans, move through, which is at some point he realized a key part is being entitled. And so he taught his sons, yeah, you because I'm powerful, I'm rich. So a lot of times, there was a lot of subtle things in there, but it was also that divide isn't always racial so much as it's class. And so it can be racial because you can have a lot of times, like, listen, the ugly part about New York was there were many a nights I put on some nice clothes, went down to get into the club, and the doorman wouldn't let me in. And then here comes some white guy in like torn jeans and flip-flops and
Mm-hmm.
walks in. So
Sure.
that's when I say racial divide, that's what I mean, like the class divide, racial divide. And so I thought it would be interesting to have this next generation of people of color having the same mentality that many of their white counterparts have. Yeah, because it's sometimes because no one has the exclusive rights on that. It's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so Clay said, this is the choice. Always act like you belong. Never apologize. Just and you go, wow, like I certainly didn't grow up with that mentality. That wasn't something that was afforded to me. But later in life you start learning. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things was so well crafted about the book, added so much texture and things to it, is things like that. Like you touch on the racism, the classism and things, but you never kind of get flogged over the head with it either. It's part of their lives. It's not their
Right.
lives.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And I thought that was really brilliant reading through, because you really got to just get a sense of where they were, who was around them, how they were going, and that they were more than any one of those things. They were this full-fledged person at all times.
Yes.
So I wonder, like, so I think we might have touched on it a little bit before, but the writing process, when you're writing Martyr Maker, maybe even is it just the 3 books? I know it's the third one's coming out.
No, there's actually a 4th book already, and I'm pretty positive there'll be 5. So I will maybe look at ending the series in 5 or 6. And it's hard to say because one of the books, I just fell in love with the character. It's a minor character. You met him. He's the African, and he is Clay. Sure. He's basically Clay's Luca Brasi being from The Godfather. So I just thought his story was, particularly in the 2nd book, you start learning more about him. When you met him in Depravity, he was just in 1 chapter, and it was very, very short.
He's very memorable, though. Right when you said it, like, oh, I remember. I was wondering if we're going to see more of him or not.
And I mean, The Godfather is my favorite film. So like I say, I get to draw from many different sources. And so creating a Black character who is reminiscent of Luca Brasi, one of the greatest, again, small character, big presence, and you just remember Luca Brasi, So anyway, this is one of those characters that spoke to me and said, they just kept demanding more. They kept demanding more. So in the 2nd book, you get to understand his story. And I liked his story so much in the 2nd book that I gave him an entire book in book 4. So I still owe a main character's story. So like I said, so I have it. There'll be at least 5, possibly 6. Yeah.
Sure. And when you go about that, so did you? I know we talked about kind of just setting out on a journey on it. When you start talking multiple books and things, is it that you have kind of the inspiration already for these next things? Is there anything? Because it seems like in book 1, right, they start mentioning Fee's brother, and that there's a murder that happens that we don't really get to it. And book 2, that ends up being the focus. Right. Are those things that just come in the process? Are you writing book 1 that kind of comes to you?
They just come in. Yeah, that's why I say I let the books take me. That's why I say I'm not really good with index cards, cue cards. It just comes, and then I keep going. Well, this character got more interesting. I think we need to explore this more. I don't know when I started out that I had any intention of making a franchise. I think as I was writing the 1st book, I realized, I still have some more. I wouldn't mind revisiting these characters. I found them to be very interesting. What can I do differently? So on one hand, I was like, well, I didn't want my 1st book to focus on, I thought it would be too predictable, the African-American character. I didn't want to come out the gate with it being Fee's story. So I was like, let me make the 1st story about Quincy. And then somewhere early, and I was like, and I can do the 2nd story about, so I was still writing the 1st book when I got the idea to do the 2nd book. But I didn't go into it going, I'm going to do a franchise. It's going to be all these sequels. But then every time I get into it, a little bit more, something starts speaking to me. Hey, this is a really interesting character. You want to explore his interesting subject matter. And so that's usually, for me, it keeps it really organic.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. It definitely comes across. Is there anything with writing? Because we talked before about directing, producing, acting, kind of all of them. And I guess one of the benefits to writing a book, right, is you don't have to worry about cost, right? It's like, you can fly them to New York and Boston, wherever you want, because you're not actually paying for any of that. Right. Is there anything else that, so as a storyteller, when you go to set off to tell a story, is there any consideration as to why you choose one medium over the other?
No, I like thrillers because I'm more drama driven. So just my natural sensibilities, my rhythms. I think because I have such a short attention span that I need intrigue. I need something that's a page turner. And best page turners are thrillers to me. Like, that's good. Oh, wow, you end a chapter and you're like, oh, I got to read what's next. As opposed to, don't get me wrong, a well-crafted love story or just family drama can have those elements. I'm just simply saying thrillers are just, that's kind of like one of the rules. You got to end the chapter.
Sure.
Oh,
Right.
shit. No. So
it's like every chapter is kind of a cliffhanger, right?
Exactly. Whereas other books don't have to be cliffhangers in order for them to work, but I do feel that a good thriller does. And so that just speaks to my natural sense of, I'm always afraid of being boring. And so that speaks to it allows me to sort of mask that insecurity. I don't know that I have one book that I wrote about my mother that's a family drama, but even that kind of has these little cliffhangers. I don't know that I can write many styles of books where I didn't rely on that propulsive rhythm. And you know what I mean? Like that's a part of me. Like, it just keeps me from getting bored. And I don't have to get insecure that the audience is going to get bored because you're like, oh, they got, the way that we ended that, you can't say that was boring, So,
right.
So it just kind of, again, it's really what speaks to you.
Yeah. Sure. Did you have any moments writing through it that you've suffered any a block or just self-doubt or anything that?
Oh yeah. There's the first book was written, I think, a little bit more. There was a certain level of ego involved, in the sense that once you get over the intimidation of writing a novel, which is kind of one of the most revered and respected things in our society. And I'm talking about good novels. I'm not just, anyone can just write a book just to write a book. I'm talking about, but to really be considered as a good novelist, I think it's, it's very daunting. It's very intimidating. I think, ironically, once I decided to jump in and then there was an ego thing of, there was an ego motor, and that propelled me to finish the first book in 3 months. Because I kind of had this bet with I can do this. I can, you know what I mean? And so you push yourself, you talk to yourself, you psych yourself up, no matter what. And then after I did it, just in some ways, because I wanted that also to be a part of the narrative, like, oh yeah, 3 months, my first novel, 3 months. Oh my God, really? That was, so that was definitely a part of it. Second book, I relaxed more. That probably took about 5 to 6 months. The third book, and then also you have to realize it depends on what's happening in my my day job. And so when I wrote the first book, I wasn't working, and I had a lot of downtime. The second book, I was working here and there. The third book, I was working a lot, so that one took a lot longer. So it depends on all of that. But yes, you definitely, the blocks, the frustration, the doubt. Now I know I can do it. The question is, am I improving the way that I want to improve? I think so, but that's I know I can, because I've done it now. I've done it 4 times. I have 4 books that I've already written. So 3 in the series, and then, like I said, the one about my mother. So I know I can, quote unquote, write a book. The question is, am I writing at the level that that I want to write at? Because I don't want to be. I made it very clear to my agent, Raquel. I said, listen, it's important for me. I do not want to be considered a celebrity author. I want to be an author. I want to be a good author. So when we start choosing adjectives, I don't, I don't set out to be, oh, he's a good Black author. No, he's a great author. I want to be known for that. He's a great author who happens to be African American. He's a great author who happens to be a man. He's a great whatever. I don't. So that's the goal always for me, and that's really, really important. So like I said, so I know I can write books. I can turn books out. Let's put it that way. I know I can turn books out. The question is, am I turning them out with the level of growth. And I'm, like I said, I start the audiobook tomorrow for the next book, and just rereading it, because I haven't read it in a while, just rereading it, you go, okay, this still holds up. Okay, yeah, major growth, major growth. Even when I was reading this little chapter to you earlier, you see the growth. I mean, I read it, and I don't have children, but you're a parent. It's like, you love all your children. You love,
Sure.
and you might have your favorite one. One might be more close to you in certain ways, and blah blah blah. But so I'll never take anything away from my babies. But just in reading that for you, I was just like, wow, double adjectives. I don't do that anymore. I trust one word. You know what I mean? More. I mean, every once in a while I'll do it, but in that little short chapter alone, there might have been 3 double adjectives in that short. And now that so there's growth where you go, you don't need to do that. Just find that one powerful word, put that there, that paints the picture. That's when you really become, I think, a strong writer. So as long as I'm moving in that direction and I'm seeing growth, I'm cool. I can, I'm going through, my industry is on strike right now, and feels like the perfect time to be writing something. And I haven't been so inspired. I'm watching a lot of movies, I'm reading, I'm, trying to find my inspiration. So technically, to some degree, I'm blocked right now. I don't have any deadlines. And that's the other thing. I write, when I want to write, but technically, I guess I'm blocked now, because you go, oh, well, we're on strike for months. This is the perfect time to write a book. It's not, it doesn't work that way. So I'm looking for some really, really good inspiration. And I do feel this. I feel that the challenge for me now is that I've become a better writer by book 3, by book 2, book 3, book 4. So I have a level that I want to continue growing from. I can just jump in and maybe do what I did with Laws of Depravity. And I'm not taking anything away from Laws of Depravity. I'm just simply saying I'm more seasoned a writer. I'm more well-rounded. I'm more grounded. I'm more, all those things. So I want to come in with, wow, really didn't see this one coming. Really saw something, really, this one really took me by surprise. You have to you set the margin, you set the standard even higher, and so that's where,
yeah. No, that's beautiful. That's one of the things I love about the arts in general, in writing in particular, is there's no peak set in, right? If you're in the sport, you're gonna peak at some point, 28, 35-ish, right? And that's so young in life, but you can pick up writing, like you said, at 50. And you can keep growing. There's no reason you can't get better at it. And it is funny, because it becomes that inverse relationship, because as you get better at it, you tend to take a little more time. It's like, I really like it. No, this isn't. So when I read stuff, my short story collection, it won some award, but I still read from that. And I still think now, I would change that. Well, it's printed, it's out, it's going to be what it is. But it's like, you still come back, 10 years later, 5 years later, and think, double adjectives, whatever it is. I think we all, as writers, we all have something, very particular things we've grown from, and it continues to go. But you go, I can't believe I did that, or why did I do that? And,
but you own it, because you can only operate off of the information that you have, or you can only operate off of the skills that you have at that moment. It doesn't mean that you don't add more skills. That doesn't mean you don't become, like I was, when I was talking to my agent the other day, we were just going, she was kind of like doing some pinpoints and, some bullet points of things. And I said, the goal is to work smarter, not harder, And so, so I'm so proud of Laws of Depravity. I'm super proud of it. You know what I mean? Like, this is my firstborn. I am so proud of it. But I also know that I've become a better parent. You know what I mean? I've become,
Yeah.
each time out, you go, oh, I've grown a little bit more. I've done this, I've done that. So I've become a better parent. And
Right.
I appreciate
Oh
that.
yeah. No, I can appreciate that completely because I was 20 when I had my first daughter, Rhiannon, and then I had two daughters. My wife had a daughter when we got married, and we had our sons. We had the four of our brood, and there's 12 years between the oldest and the youngest. And sometimes they go, "Oh, Dad, you didn't do that when we were kids." I'm like, "Yeah, I was 20, I was 25. And now I have 10 years experience being a parent. Like there's like." I do behave a little differently. I've tried to grow and learn from this as you go, and
Exactly.
yeah, I mean it was beautiful. It is, and they're all our babies, right? All the books and everything. It's like, yeah, that's your baby. You can't change them once they're out there. They are who they are, and you let them live and appreciate who they are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you own
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Take a sip right now.
I know I've been neglecting my whiskey here. That's the last thing I wanted to touch on with Loss of Depravity. Actually, was let me go back to my page. I think there was another moment, and I wonder if it was that same scene, but it was there's a reference to Sugar Ray Leonard, the retired boxer now, and how he had described his style as an economy of movement. And then reading through the novel, it struck me, and maybe this has changed, so maybe this is old thinking, and your new writing this it maybe doesn't do this, but it struck me as your writing has an economy of movement to it. And there's not lots. It's most of the chapters are pretty crisp, direct, or kind of they're vivid, but they're to the point. Maybe there's a double adjective here or there. Maybe not. I didn't always notice them. I don't think I noticed them at all. But is that something you strive for? Or is that
absolutely apps and life? That is a philosophy. I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he told me he actually saw that interview. And when you look at Sugar Ray, I didn't actually see the interview, but I've seen Sugar Ray fight a lot. And so the philosophy is this: why do this if the punch is here, when all you need to do is this? That still clears. This is all extra. Right. So why put in 20 words when 2 are going to make it even more powerful, more memorable? You know what I mean? Right. So in life in general, we do too much, and personally, I do too much. And so I've just been, over the last several years, economizing the movement, the effort. Like, I was always the person, like, if I had a hater or something and somebody said something or somebody did something, like, it was almost like redundant. You have to crush them and then burn them, and then, you know what I mean? You have, and just like, dude, the fact that you're ignoring them and the fact that you, like, that's it. You don't, you know what I mean? But I think when you're younger, you have even just the fantasies of, like, their demise, they're this, and you want to do, and I'm not a vindictive person. It's more mental thoughts more than the actions. But my point is, you've already made your statement. The state, right. What do they say? Sometimes no response is a response. So to go, okay, I'm going to ignore you, and then I'm going, no, you've made you're not important enough for me to respond to. And I've moved on. That's the economy of movement. That's an example of the economy of movement, because it's not just all in sort of negative thing, but even in a positive. My nephew one time sent a letter, and it was very flowery, and I told him, I said, be more concerned with the intention than the execution. The intention is to show how you feel or express something. But when you bombard it with all this stuff, then also all I'm thinking about is, wow, this person is using so many words here. So it's taking you away from your intention. And so as I give that advice, I try to live that advice. But I just thought that was and when you're writing, they say the thing about writers, they say a writer is always writing because he's either writing, or he or she is either they're writing or they're thinking about writing. And so for me, particularly when I'm writing, when I'm physically writing, the receptors are open like this. So you just catch all this, like, rain barrels. You just catch every drop. And so someone says something. Now, someone has been dropping knowledge in our lives forever. But now I have an outlet for that knowledge. So when I hear something amazing, I can, so when my buddy was, hey man, I was watching this interview with Sugar Ray Leonard. He was talking about the economy of moving. I'm like, oh wow, I can use that now, as opposed to kind of hearing it and it just, you know what I mean? So if every day I get words, I get daily words, so I look up some words and I go, that's going to draw too much attention. That sounds like a word. That's not a natural word. But then sometimes you go, wow, that's a great word. I don't know when I'm going to use it. So I have a running list of great words. And so, because sometimes when I'm struggling to find the perfect expression, so these words aren't just to sound like a writer or to sound educated. These words are to sometimes help me, I'm so glad I have that word, And so for me, just being in a position to take something great and something poignant, whether it's one of your friends telling you about an interview with Sugar Ray Leonard, but it's seeing it, it's seeing seeing him, just that. Not and you go. I used to take martial arts, and same thing. Like the really good fighters, Bruce Lee. He wasn't doing all this extra, requirement on the, strain on muscles and flexing. He was just. What's the objective? The objective is to avoid being hit. So here's the punch. If I do that, guess what? I fulfilled my objective. If I do this, yes, I fulfilled my objective, but at what cost? Because now me going so far over here may also leave me vulnerable, leave me off balance to another one. So sometimes it's incumbent upon us to be economical, because you're not just blocking this one. You're not just dodging this one. You're still in a position that even if they try to change up, you're ready. But when you're way over here and you're off balance, they might kick you.
Sure, right.
Oh, I didn't see that one coming. I mean, sometimes now on Instagram, you get all these things of these guys, MMA fighting, and they're doing things. And then the guy will do, he'll swing and then he'll turn around and he'll hit you with the elbow. And you go, where did that one come from? So you gotta be, but if you've held it together, you might be able to see it coming more. So that's where that comes from.
Sure. Right. And you might be able to counter too, right? You keep that balance, keep in the pocket there. So, but you see that with a lot of times with youth versus maturity, right? As a kid, like I tease my kids all the time. It's like walking through the house and suddenly they're just flailing and you're like, well, what just happened? Oh, well, I saw a bee or something. It's like, just step away.
What is that going to do? Yeah. What is that? Is that really going to change things? Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, that's beautiful. So, actually, so maybe now would be a fun time if we can do a reading from the third book is Laws of Depravity. Annihilation.
Laws of Annihilation. Okay, so since I've never done this before, just bear with me because I'm going to try to, because this is 7 pages, so I'm going to try to jump through some stuff and still keep it cohesive. So they were identical twins, Israel and David Abramovitz. To look at one was to see the other. They moved alike. They sounded alike. They were in every perceptible way each other's mirror. The brothers were 2 Reform rabbis, 36 years old, deeply rooted in their faith. Their father and both grandfathers before them were rabbis. They came from a long line of sacrifice and philanthropy. Their grandfather, on their mother's side, marched and bled with Martin Luther King Jr. He even shared a cell with Ralph Abernathy in Mississippi the summer that Bull Connor declared open season on the Northern agitators. The twins had coal black hair and soft blue eyes. They were 5'11" and built like they knew their way around the gym. They resembled soap opera actors more than they did men of God. They contradicted the stereotypical image of Jewish holy men. They were by all accounts good men, both virtuous and humble. Like their father and grandfathers, they held on to the inherited belief that there was more light in man than darkness. They were hip, handsome, and highly respected. The mayor personally called them to help quell tensions that had been steadily escalating between the Hasidic community in Bensonhurst and Borough Park and outraged members of the New York City's African-American community. The trouble had begun 3 weeks earlier when a group of angry Hasids chased a Black teenager named Devin Timmons to his death after he sprayed graffiti on the side of a synagogue. When no one was indicted for the boy's death, the steady unrest left Borough Park feeling a lot like Ferguson, Missouri. Black Lives Matter echoed in the pockets of New York day and night. There were protests and even small riots, from do or die Bed-Stuy all the way up to money-making Manhattan and the boogie-down Bronx. The Abramovitz brothers went to some of the Black churches and spoke directly to the congregants, pleading for peace. Even though most of the violence and riots had slowed, parts of New York still walked the thinnest of tightropes. The Sinai Temple on East 73rd Street was unusually crowded. Throughout the 2-hour-long evening Shabbat service, Israel and David took turns addressing their members and invited guests. The brothers played off each other very well. Although they treated the recited scripture with the utmost reverence, they each took their turn injecting a respectable amount of humor while addressing the crowd. A half-dozen African-American preachers and community leaders sat in the sanctuary amongst regular members who quietly translated both the spoken or written Hebrew pronunciation. After the service, along with their wives, Israel and David hosted Oneg Shabbat dinner in the opening courtyard behind the temple. Platters of food were placed down the middle of the long table, which seated 20. Before they ate, 3 prayers were offered. An hour after everyone had left, David and Israel stayed behind to put the finishing touches on a speech that they were to give at a rally the next day at the Harlem State Office building. They both loved the quietness of the temple when they were the only ones there. It's almost 11:30. We can tweak in the morning if we need to, David said. I just want to come up with a better ending while I'm thinking about it, Israel responded. The ending's fine. Just leave it. Let's go home. I'll make sure everything is locked up. Being the more pedantic of the two, Israel ignored his brother and continued working on his laptop as David exited the office. Israel was so caught up in his work that he didn't notice that David had been gone for 20 minutes. Once he stopped typing on his laptop, he became quickly aware of how intensely quiet it was. Only after he heard a strange noise coming from another room did he look at the clock and realize the passage of time. David? When his brother didn't answer, he called out again, a little louder. David! He waited for a response that never came. I just finished up the speech. Stop clowning around. The only thing that came back to him was the hollow echo of his own voice. All right, moron, you made your point. I'm coming now. As Israel turned off his laptop and stood to leave, the lights went out. Since their office had no windows, everything immediately turned black. He reached for the beaded chain of his desk lamp, but when he tugged it, nothing happened. Israel feared darkness even more than he feared God. When he was 9 and playing a game of hide-and-go-seek with his brother, he accidentally locked himself in an abandoned refrigerator for the worst 4 minutes of his life. David knew better than anyone Israel's paralyzing fear of the dark. The more Israel pulled on the lamp's chain with growing desperation, the more he felt like a scared 9-year-old again. The black office felt tight, like a slightly larger version of the refrigerator in his childhood. Try as he might, he couldn't slow his overactive mind. He could only think of the horrible possibilities lying in wait to take advantage of his temporary blindness. The darkness was unending, a frightening ellipsis. His lips and mouth were dry from the heavy breathing he wasn't aware that he was doing. The temple had 2 generators, so he ruled out the possibility of a blackout. The truth was, Israel had no idea what was going on, but he did know that David had never, nor would he ever, play on his deepest fears. That bit of knowledge was the very thing that made Israel even more afraid. Similar to the time when he was 9, the darkness debilitated him. All semblance of calm was shattered under the heft of a vivid imagination. Israel was afraid that the monster of his childhood had returned. He could feel its presence all around him. The shadows were no longer innocent. The peace and quiet were no longer comforting. The air itself grew coarse and inimical. He was petrified that his nightmare had come back to smother him and take his nashon, his soul. Israel mumbled the name Malek Amoth, Yiddish for angel of death. He remembered his iPhone and used its flashlight to help him find his way out of his office and down the narrow corridor. The beam of light was unsteady in his trembling hand. The air conditioning hadn't been off for more than 5 minutes, and yet he was already dripping sweat. Although Israel hadn't had a panic attack since the tragic event as a child, it all came rushing back. The constricted lungs and unavailable breath, the heavy palpitations of a runaway heartbeat, the uncontrollable quaking. David? Still nothing. Just outside the main auditorium, he thought he heard something. He stopped and listened. He wasn't sure what it was, but he heard it in the distance and kept moving toward it. Whatever it was faint but steady, pulling him closer. On the other side of the auditorium, under the blanket of darkness, he heard what sounded like the low whimper of a wounded pet. As he continued fumbling his way forward, there was rustling in the corner. Israel stopped and turned when he thought he heard something behind him. David, you know this is not funny to me. I swear to... He didn't finish his sentence because he slipped on something wet on the marble floor. When he retrieved his phone, the light had dimmed considerably, but he could still make out the stream of blood in which he found himself. Just as his panic started stabbing him, the whimpering in the corner grew louder, the muffled sound of words being attempted but thwarted by something unknown. The light on his phone was barely working, but as he held it in his outstretched hand, he could just make out the sight of David on the floor in full tremors, wet with blood. David's mouth was gagged and his hands and feet had been cut off and were lying a few inches from his body. Israel's legs suddenly felt like steel girders, immovable and unbendable. He stood frozen, his body completely numbed by paralysis. He tried to scream, but all he could do was vomit. He heard movement behind him, followed by the peculiar whooshing sound of a sharp steel cutting through air in search of a solid target. It was then that he felt the searing pain of his hand being separated from his arm. Someone from behind him, someone large, gagged him and smothered his woeful cries. He felt a heavy knee in his back pinning him to the floor. Suddenly the lights turned on and Israel saw blood, more than he ever imagined the human body was capable of producing. He saw the sizable pool from his severed hand inching toward and then converging with the river of blood that surrounded his dying brother. Israel grunted David's name and struggled to reach him, but he was made helpless under the knee of something behemoth. All Israel could do was lie on the floor of the temple, bleeding and praying to God while watching his brother close his eyes for the last time. Israel and David were born 6 minutes apart. First came David, then came Israel. They left the world in the same order.
Well, I'm going to have nightmares tonight. Thanks,
Little, little light reading while you're drinking.
Some summer beach reading. No, that is powerful. I cannot wait to give that a read. So I guess it's that time of the show. It's I like to call it last call. You don't have to leave, but you'll have to restart the video. I love to ask everyone the very last question, a two-parter here is one is what piece of advice would you give for aspiring writers out there? And the second part being what piece of advice would you just give to just anyone out there viewing that, just what one minor thing that maybe they can do that maybe make their lives just a little bit better?
Well, I mean, I think the advice for writers, and I mean, I've been writing for a long time now, or for a decent time now. I still don't feel necessarily comfortable saying, here's advice. So I'll just say this. The same advice I would give to any artist, any person pursuing art is learn the craft. And whatever that means, expose yourself as much, read, go to conventions, go to surround yourself, particularly with writers, it's very important. Surround yourself with intelligent, honest, hard, critical people. That's how you grow. So if you want someone, if your mother's going to read your book and think, oh my God, it's amazing. Okay. Unless your mother's a professor or a publisher, that's a subjective opinion. You want some, even though people are your friends or people know you, you have to give them permission and encourage them. It's okay. It's okay. Just tell me the truth so that they can, because that's how you grow. You grow based on the feedback that you get. You grow based on the people that you surround yourself with. The last thing I would say for writers, it's really simple and it's really helpful. Read up, and meaning read good material. Sometimes people feel, oh, there's so much value in learning what doesn't work. Why waste your time? I like to read writers that make me angry with them, that make me jealous of them. I want to choke them. How the hell could they come up with that phrase?
Right.
I could never think that. How do they come up with that? I want to kill them. That's what inspired. That's what makes me go, okay, I'm coming after you. You had that line, I'm coming. You had that that paragraph was so beautiful. I had to read it multiple times because it just. Well, now that's challenging me to create my chapters that you go back and you read. You want people, the quotable lines, the memorable characters, whether they're small. So read up. I wouldn't waste my time unless it's just for your recreation, just to turn your mind off. Don't bother with the bad stuff. Because you're going to learn much more from the good stuff. I'm not saying there's value in everything, but reading takes time and energy. Why waste it? So I would say that. And then your last question is, the sooner you start something, the sooner you can master it. So if you keep putting things off, then you're not putting any time in. So I forgot, who is it that says if you put in 10,000 hours, you'll master anything?
Malcolm Gladwell, I think.
Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah. So, the sooner so instead of making excuses, at some point you just got to jump in. Once you jump in, something magical happens. There's an awareness, like I said earlier. Before I started writing, I didn't necessarily have anywhere to put the cool quotes like the economy of movement. That philosophy, I had nothing to do other than while you get, and then you'll forget it because you're not even using it really. But you'll find once you make a commitment to doing whatever, whether it's writing, whether it's making liquor, making glass, whatever it is, the universe will start talking to you. And the universe has already been talking to you. It's just that you weren't aware because it had no relevance at that time. But now once you start writing, you start getting information about writing. Now it's relevant.
Sure.
You start deciding to make alcohol. The universe has been talking to you about temperature and soil and humidity and all types of things. You just had no way to put that. That didn't mean anything. You had no way to put it. So the sooner you start something, the sooner you can begin to master. I think mastering something is a lifelong thing, but you can begin.
Sure.
So the sooner the beginning of that education happens. So I would say that.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, that's a beautiful way to look at it. I sometimes encourage people, especially writing a book, is just think of it like laying brick. Like you're going to build a fence, you got to start putting brick down. You just put mortar down. It's going to take a while, but you don't start. It's not going to build itself.
No, and what is it? The longest journey begins with the first step.
Right. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The tallest wall begins with the first brick. Same thing. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's beautiful. And so if people want to find more about your writing, where's the best place for them to go?
I am on all social media. I have a website that Penny runs. I believe it's I am Eriq La Salle.
Okay.
.com.
And I'll get the links and include.
You'll get all, but that's but all the cool thing about that website, and the reason I'm floundering a little bit is because we just changed it and we updated it. But the cool thing is, once you get in there, it gives you the movies, the TV, the producing, the directing, the books. It gives you whatever portal you want to explore. So yeah, if you post that. That would be, and Penny has the exact thing, and then all my social is just my name, Eriq La Salle, on IG and X, which is formerly Twitter, and Facebook.
Right.
So I'm easy to find, but the website is definitely the way to go.
There you go. Very good. Yeah, the X thing is funny because I had some explaining to do with my wife when she saw X on my phone. Like she did not realize that had become Twitter. Like no, it's just Twitter. I don't know what to tell you.
Innocent. Yeah, exactly.
Ask Mr. Musk. I don't know. Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on. This was a thrill for me, a real honor. You get to spend some time with you.
No, thank you. Great interview. I love the questions and the chit chat. And here's to you, my friend. Cheers.
Yes, here's to you, my friend.